The following podcast contains bizarre theories, strange facts, and some out of this world opinions. Listener discretion is advised, especially if you trust the government.
Conspirashy. Conspirashy.
Welcome back, conspiracy lovers, to another episode of Conspirashy, the show where no story is too strange, no theory too far-fetched, and no one is safe from our deep dives into the unknown. I'm Ash, your host, your guide into the world conspiracies and occasional devil's advocate. And if you're new around here, welcome to the rabbit hole. Just a reminder, we drop new episodes every Wednesday, so smash that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. So as you can tell by the title of today's episode, we are diving into MK Ultra. If you don't know what MK Ultra is, you're definitely going to want to tune in. You're definitely going to want to hear this, because this isn't just a conspiracy theory. This is history. This has been documented. It's true. It's out there. You can do all the research on it yourself. You can listen to this episode. This is crazy, because this is how far a government will go to literally control everybody. So this is about to be a mind bender, so buckle up, because today we're talking about the government's actual attempt at literal mind control. Yep, the government wanted to learn about mind control and how to manipulate people, so they turned to drugs, psychedelics, LSD, all the good stuff. But here's the kicker: most of the time people didn't even know that they were part of the experiment. So imagine that you're going about your day, sipping your coffee, and boom, you're tripping like you're in a Pink Floyd album. Let's dive in. So picture it. It's the Cold War, tensions are high, paranoia is even higher, and the CIA, well, they're convinced the communists have cracked the code on mind control. Like full-on puppet master vibes. They didn't know if it was some weird drug cocktail or secret hypnosis technique, but something was definitely up. You see, during the Korean War, about 5,000 American POWs signed letters basically saying, hey, this US invasion, not cool, we don't support it. That's essentially what happened, right? Now, some of these soldiers took it all back when they got home, claiming they were coerced, but others stood by what their statements. I said what I said. You know what I'm saying? And a few were like, you know what? I'm just going to stay in Korea. Peace out, America. So, naturally, the CIA was like, hold on a sec. Are these guys brainwashed? What's going on here? Did the commies get inside their heads? And this kicked off the whole obsession with the idea of mind control. And listen, now, you could chalk it up to something like Stockholm Syndrome. Being a POW isn't exactly a holiday, but the CIA wasn't taking any chances. They were like, we need to figure this out, and fast. So their logic: the enemy can control minds, we need to control minds first. Makes sense, right? Well, no, it doesn't. Anyway, back to the returning soldiers. Some were spouting communist ideas, others refused to come home, and that's when the CIA director Alan Dulles decided to weigh in, put his 2 pence worth in, get involved. He gave this very public speech, all high and mighty, as, you know, a CIA director probably would be. He said, brain warfare, non-consensual human experiments, that's against American values. And then what did he do? He marched right back into CIA HQ and was like, all right, lads, let's fire up this new project, MK Ultra. Consent? Who needs it? Who needs consent? The hypocrisy was off the charts. And here's the kicker, right? The US had literally presented the Nuremberg Code to the world. You know, the whole no experimenting on humans without their consent thing. Yeah. But did Americans sign it? No. They were like, you should all sign this Nuremberg Code. You should do that. Do as we say, not as we do. But we won't. We've got stuff to do. We've got mind control to take care of. So hypocritical. It's unbelievable. So then we enter Operation Sea Spray. So this took place in 1950. That's Operation Sea Spray in 1950. The US Navy decided to play mad scientist and sprayed two kinds of bacteria over the San Francisco Bay Area. Why San Francisco? Well, the city has this natural fog, and it was the perfect cover. The Navy claimed the bacteria were harmless, but surprise, surprise, people started getting sick. Oh, would you look at that? Hospitals filled up, and at least one person died. Yep. And who knows how many long term health issues popped up later. I mean, imagine being a kid in San Fran at the time, breathing in all that stuff. It's pretty scary. And the fact that they just openly did it, it's just, yeah, it's mental. But MK Ultra wasn't just about spraying bacteria. They had much bigger plans for this one. So the project officially kicked off in 1953, right after Project Artichoke and Project Chatter merged their efforts. Because why have two shady projects when you can just have one mega shady one? Like, you know, what's the point in having all of this resources going over there and there when you can just put it together and you can just, do what you got to do over San Francisco? Eh? So, what was the goal? The goal was to find a drug or any method really that could control minds. At the center of all of this was Sidney Gottlieb. He was a chemist who became known as Poisoner in Chief. So, he was born to Hungarian Jewish immigrants in the Bronx in 1918, studied botany and chemistry, and eventually got his doctorate in biochemistry from Caltech. Before joining the CIA, he worked for the Department of Agriculture and the FDA, shock, where he, and get a load of this, developed tests to detect drugs in the human body. Kinda ironic, don't you think? By 1951, Alan Dulles personally brought him into the CIA fold. Not what you know, it's who you know. Gottlieb's mentor had run the US bio-warfare program at Fort Detrick in Maryland, so he had the perfect credential. The guy knew a lot about poisons, which, as you can imagine, made him a very valuable asset to the CIA. So when Sidney Gottlieb joined the CIA, Project Bluebird and Project Artichoke were already in full swing. But Sidney, he wasn't just some background player, he quickly became the head of the Chemical Division of Technical Services, a brand new office at the time. And his orders from CIA Director Alan Dulles were simple: start experimenting. No consent forms, no paperwork, nothing. Just dive straight in. Totally, completely and utterly illegal, by the way. But the CIA was like, laws? Phew, we never heard of them. Crack on. So if you're already thinking, what the hell is going on here? How did the CIA get away with it? They are breaking so many laws. They've sprayed San Francisco, for Christ's sake. How are they getting away with it? Well, this is what makes MK Ultra such a fascinating topic of discussion, because they really did get away with it. It's mental. So let's talk about something that is gonna, raise that suspiciously convenient in all of us. So Alan Dulles' brother, John Foster Dulles, had just been appointed Secretary of State. So yeah, any whispers about these secret projects silenced all the way to the top. They didn't want anyone finding out what was going on behind those classified doors. And what was going on? What was going on, right? Well, they called it Hail Drug. A nice, innocuous sounding name for something incredibly sinister. Sydney was out here dosing unsuspected people with LSD and other hallucinogenics, financing psychiatric research, and developing techniques designed to crush the human psyche until people would admit to anything. Yeah, literal mind breaking. MK Ultra officially came to life when the CIA and the Department of the Navy realized, wait a minute, we're both doing the same shady stuff, just under different names and budgets. So they rolled Artichoke and Chatter into one big project, MK Ultra. Everything they'd learned from those early experiments laid the foundations for the madness that was about to unfold. And you are not ready for this shit. This is crazy, guys. I can't believe this is a thing. And like everyone's just like, oh yeah, it's just MK Ultra, whatever. This is mental that the government gets away with this. Like, I can't believe it. But let's get involved. So early MK Ultra experiments, they went all in. Like they did not hold back. We're talking shock therapy, hypnosis, polygraphs, radiation exposure, low frequency sound blasts, and something called a blackjack device. And of course, drugs, toxins, chemicals, the whole evil scientist starter pack. Like this is a Bond villain, literally, pretty much. So what the bloody hell is a blackjack device? Well, it delivered a high impact blow with low surface pressure. So basically, what it is it can knock someone out cold without leaving any permanent damage. And you might be thinking, well, why do we need that when we've got John Jones? But no, John Jones would absolutely leave you with permanent life threatening damage. He is the greatest MMA fighter of all time, after all. I mean, come on, we've all heard Dana White. Um, so, why would you need a device that could knock you out without leaving any permanent damage? Well, if you think about it, you knock someone out, inject them with LSD, and then see what happens to them when they wake up. It's absolutely unhinged stuff. And it gets worse. They weren't just stopping at drugs and blunt force, they ramped things up with extreme hypnosis sessions. So picture this, holding people's eyes open, clockwork orange style, if you know what I mean, bombarding them with violent, gruesome images of war and murder. It's like what you would expect of a brainwashing scene in a dystopian movie, like something like a end of the world, kind of like a, what's a good example? Like kind of how I'd imagine they treat people in Silo. If you've watched that on Apple TV, I think if people get out of control in that series next season, I think they might be using this type of stuff to like control them. Great show, by the way. You should definitely check out Silo. Second season, I think, was a bit. Wasn't as good as the first season. The first season was so good because it was new and it was fresh. Second season, I think they went on some storylines a bit too long. And if you haven't seen Silo, you probably don't give a fuck about what I'm talking about now. So, but if you have, shout out. You have good taste in TV. So yeah, they basically were just bombarding them with all of these extreme hypnosis and brainwashing them. It's really scary stuff. And so you might be asking, why did they have that obsession with LSD? So okay, they do hypnosis, they do all of this shock therapy, but why did they introduce LSD? Well, in the late 40s, there was this rumor floating around that the Soviets were buying up the world's supply of LSD and working on producing it in massive quantities. So the CIA completely freaked out and was like, oh, they want to use LSD for mind control. Cool, cool, cool. Well, we'll just beat them to it then. Let's get to work. So they started hoarding huge amounts of the stuff, convinced they could create sleeper agents and control minds on a mass scale. Now, whether the Soviets were actually planning that, who knows? It might have just been Cold War paranoia, but the CIA wasn't taking any chances. They ended up with a stockpile of LSD so large, they could have probably thrown the weirdest rave in history. I mean, that would have been some trippy stuff. But here's where MK Ultra takes a very dark turn. And honestly, it was already pitch black, but now it gets even darker if you can imagine it. So while they did have some willing participants, some, most of the test subjects had no idea what was happening to them. Not a fucking clue. The CIA targeted vulnerable groups, mentally impaired boys in state schools, soldiers, sexual psychopaths held in state hospitals, and even paratroopers and submarine crews. And they were all selected for assassination training. So anyone awarded for bravery, perfect candidate. The CIA figured that bravery meant that they could be molded into efficient assassins. But they didn't stop there. Murderers and prisoners became prime subjects too. The CIA dangled simple perks like extra recreational time in front of them, and desperate inmates volunteered, having no clue they were signing up to be dosed with hallucinogenics or subjected to psychological torture. Eventually, the experiment spread to universities and college campuses where researchers were tricked into thinking they were conducting harmless psychological studies. The schools had no idea they were being funded by the CIA or that their students were part of one of the most sinister experiments in US history. This is like just no one has a clue. They are just absolutely torturing people. This is crazy. So basically, at this point, anyone can get it. Like, it's on site for everyone with this fucking experiment. This is crazy stuff. I can't believe what I'm saying. I can't believe when I was doing this research, I just couldn't believe it. It just kept getting darker and darker and more twisted. And it's just mental. And I keep saying it, but I can't believe they get away with it. It's so mind blowing to me. And you might be thinking, what were they actually trying to achieve with all this? Well, this is where it gets even more weird because the goals were all over the place. There wasn't just like one standard goal of like, okay, we just need to mind control. Their goals and their outcomes of this MK Ultra were just so sporadic. So you got things like, could drugs mimic or enhance the intoxicating effects of alcohol? That was one of the goals. Would hallucinogenics make hypnosis easier? Could they push a person's limit of torture and coercion without them breaking? And the biggest one, of course, was, could they gain total control over a person's mind? So they weren't just looking to create mind controlled individuals, they wanted to build what they call sleeper agents. So just like in the movies, right? These weren't people meant to stay locked away in labs. They were supposed to live in regular communities, scatter them across the globe, ready to be activated whenever needed. It sounds like science fiction. It sounds like Matrix or some shit. But how many spy movies have we seen with that exact plot? It's funny how fiction starts to blur with reality when you dig deep enough. I mean, everything we see on TV, every film, everything ever is conditioning us to what is actually going on. I mean, come on. So, Sidney Gottlieb, the guy I mentioned earlier, had a twisted vision. He believed that in order to control a mind, he needed to follow a two-step process. So, first, completely erase the existing mind, wipe it clean, obliterate the person's identity, and then implant a new mind in the empty shell that was left behind. The scary part of that is that he made serious progress on step one. Step two, well, allegedly, he didn't get that far. But who knows? The CIA wasn't exactly handing out transparent reports on MK Ultra, were they? But let's get on to the experiment that really blew the lid on MK Ultra. The one that dragged it into the public eye. It was the death of Frank Olson. On December 28th, 1953, at around 2:30 a.m., a man plummeted from the 10th floor of a New York City hotel window wearing nothing but his underwear. His name? Frank Olson. When he hit the pavement, glass shards rained down from the shattered windows above. But here's the weirdest part. When people rushed to his aid, he was still alive. He was choking on blood, desperately trying to say something, but the only thing anyone could make out was the CIA. Damn. Damn. Is the only thing they could make out was the CIA. Moments later, Frank Olson took his final breath. My god, you can't write this shit. Honestly, you can't write this shit. This is like a movie. So the hotel room was registered to Frank Olson and another man named Robert Lashbrook, who, surprise, surprise, was a CIA agent. The official story, Frank Olson had been struggling with mental health issues and jumped to his death. But his family wasn't buying it, and neither was the public, because as more details emerged, it got a bit suspicious. So it turns out Frank Olson was a CIA scientist himself. He'd been working on biological warfare projects and had grown increasingly uncomfortable with what he was seeing. Shortly before his death, he attended a CIA retreat where his colleagues slipped LSD into his drink without his knowledge. After that, he spiraled into a deep depression, questioning his work, the ethics of the CIA, and his own safety. Some believe he was planning to blow the whistle on MK Ultra, and the CIA, well, they couldn't risk that, could they? So, what do you guys think? Was it suicide or murder? The official line stuck with suicide, of course. But years later, a second autopsy revealed blunt force trauma to his head, consistent with a violent struggle before he went out the window. The evidence, of course, points now towards a cover up, and Frank Olson became the face of the MK Ultra scandal, a tragic reminder of what happens when unchecked power meets paranoia. And even back then, before the new autopsy, I don't understand how this was classed as a suicide because when the police arrived at the hotel room, things were already off, to say the least, to be honest. The room was completely empty, no signs of a struggle, no disarray, except for one thing: Robert Lashbrook. Frank's CIA colleague was sitting in the bathroom, head buried in his hands like he was trying to disappear into the tiles. Robert claimed he'd been asleep and was startled awake by a loud noise, which he suggested was Frank hurling himself out of the window. When questioned, he couldn't even remember if the window had been open or closed before the incident. But, well, it's definitely broke now. The, the police, however, at the time, they didn't think twice about it. To them, it was an open and shut case. Frank was reportedly depressed, and coincidentally, he was scheduled to check into a hospital the very next day for a mental health treatment. So, their conclusion was just suicide. Depressed man, hotel window, case closed. But the night manager, who was the first to rush to Frank's side after he fell, wasn't convinced. In fact, he thought the whole situation was suspicious as fuck. So, first of all, you got like that Frank's last words were about the CIA, which I mean, red flag. But even beyond that, the logistics of Frank's supposed suicide just didn't add up. So let's break it down so you can make up your own mind for this. Okay, so for Frank to have jumped out that window, he would have needed to have done the following things: one, get up in the middle of the night; two, run full speed across the hotel room, dodge two beds, launch himself through a window that was either closed or had curtains and shades fully drawn, and somehow smash a window and fall to his death. Now, I don't know about you, and I've never wanted to jump out of a window, but if I was planning to jump out of a window, I think I'd just make it a little bit easier on myself. Like, I don't know, open the window, like open the window and just fall out. I don't know, maybe that's just me. But here's another thing: it was the 1950s, so yeah, hotel windows did open back then. It's not like the ones we have now, where it's like sealed and it's just aircon and you can't open the window because maybe too many people jump out. Um, but why would someone dive through curtains, shades, and glass without even checking if the window opened first? It's almost like he wasn't the one that decided he was going out of the window. And also, if he did want to end his life, why not just go all the way to the roof? A 10-story fall, it's kind of risky. You might survive. Like 10 stories, I mean, it's 80% death, but I'd say you got 20% chance of surviving that. But the roof, it's pretty final. I mean, it's kind of like it's like a nail in the coffin. Like, I'm done. I'm out. Get me out of this world. I'm done. I'm jumping. So the whole thing of that is just off, and it doesn't make any sense. And when things don't make sense, it's probably because it doesn't make sense. So there's something off, and the night manager's gut feeling told him that something wasn't right. So he took it upon himself to check the hotel's switchboard to see if any calls had been made from that room before the police arrived. And guess what? Bingo. The operator confirmed that a call had been made just minutes earlier. And back then, since all calls went through a switchboard, the operator overheard everything. Robert Lashbrook had made the call to a man named Dr. Harold Abramson, a CIA affiliated doctor. The entire call was eerily short. Robert said, "He's gone." Dr. Abramson calmly replied, "Well, that's too bad." And that was it. That was the whole call. No panic, no surprise, just a matter of fact exchange, like they'd been expecting it. You know, kind of like a, it's done, the job's done, good, get back to base kind of thing, which is wild. But Frank's family were later notified, but they were told it was just an accident. Either he'd fallen or jumped from his hotel room. When it came time for the funeral, they had to have a closed casket. Frank's body was so badly damaged, they couldn't fix him up for an open viewing. His wife tried to move forward for the sake of their kids, but Frank's son wasn't ready to let it go. And neither should you be. When things seem off, you should chase that down. So, as little boys do, Frank's son constantly asked questions about his dad. What happened that night? Why did he die? But his mum always gave him the same cold answer: "You're never going to know what happened in that room." And that is the sad truth, to be honest. These people are so protected. And yeah. But that wasn't good enough for Frank. So years later, he decided to get to the bottom of it. He ordered a second autopsy on his father's body, and what they found blew the original story to pieces. So the autopsy revealed that Frank had been injured before he went out that window. There was a hole in his head consistent with a blow from a butt of a gun. So he's basically been pistol whipped, and his body, it lacked the typical cuts and lacerations you'd expect from someone diving through a closed window. So if the window was open, how did the glass rain down around him after he hit the ground? Either Frank was heavier than glass, which doesn't make much sense, or here's the more likely scenario: someone smashed the window after he'd already fallen to make it look like suicide. This new evidence sparked a firestorm of theories. So, why exactly was he assassinated? Well, turns out Frank wasn't exactly cut out for the work he was doing, right? It's believed that Frank started voicing concerns about the ethics of MK Ultra. Some even think he was considering blowing the whistle, as I mentioned before, and in the paranoid world of the CIA, that was way too dangerous for them. They couldn't risk Frank exposing their dirty secrets, so instead of firing him, or I don't know, giving him help, they chose the darker path: elimination. Frank Olson's death wasn't just a tragic accident, though. It became the smoking gun that exposed MK Ultra to the world, a chilling reminder of how far the government was willing to go to control minds and silence dissent. By this point, the CIA had ditched all their old truth serums. They decided LSD was the golden ticket. They believed it was the ultimate tool: dose someone up, make them spill the secrets, and the best part, they'd forget everything afterwards. But as we know now, that's not exactly how LSD works. Anyone who's ever tried acid knows you remember, sometimes a little too much and a little too vividly. Not saying I've done it, just saying that I've heard through the grapevine. But anyway, Frank Olson was actually in that New York City hotel because he was supposed to be transferred to a psychiatric hospital the next day. That was the plan, at least. That's what they told him. Robert Lashbrook was tasked with escorting him there like a babysitter with a PhD. The whole narrative, it even made it into the New York Times. But you know who didn't know anything about any of this in terms of like being taken to a psychiatric hospital, that he was going through all of this? Frank's family. They had no idea. So they found out the same way everyone else did, by reading about it in the newspaper. So you imagine waking up, flipping through the morning headlines, finding out your husband or dad just dead, but he was also tangled up in something way bigger than you ever knew he was involved in. And just when you think this story can't get any weirder, it does. Well, 10 days after Frank's death, his family got a personal invitation to the White House. What? Okay? Yeah, honestly, the Olsen family was summoned to meet the President of the United States, and not just any president, Gerald Ford himself. Ford gave them a formal apology, and then just to crank the weirdness up a notch, Alan Dulles, you know, the former head of the freaking CIA, also apologized to them. Now, on the surface, this might seem like a heartfelt gesture, we're sorry for your loss kind of thing. But come on, when has the CIA ever handed out apologies like it's some sweets? This wasn't just about mourning a tragic accident. This was about covering their own asses, covering their story, making sure that the family's on board with what they're saying. And they all agreed Frank's death was wrongful. It shouldn't have never happened. But here's the catch to it, it's not so heartfelt. They had a deal in mind, and that deal was the government offered the Olsen family $750,000 if they agreed to not sue them. Now, to put that in perspective, that's about $8.8 million today, in today's money, with inflation. So think about that. The president of the United States was like, yeah, Frank shouldn't have died. That's a real bummer. But hey, here's almost 9 million bucks. Let's just, keep it between us. Okay? Gentleman's handshake. Just keep it between us. And if you're telling me that doesn't raise your eyebrows, I don't know what will, because if this was just a simple case of a depressed scientist who tragically took his own life, why is the CIA and the president so eager to cut a check? And it wasn't about the money. To be fair, like the CIA isn't exactly pinching pennies. If they were worried about finances, they wouldn't be tossing around that kind of cash. So what they were really worried about was exposure. It has to be. They were terrified that if the Olsen family dug too deep, or worse, went public, they'd uncover the CIA's dirty little experiments. So they just tried to shut them up. But Frank's kids, they weren't having it. Not at all. See, the Olsen children grew up knowing almost nothing about their father. Who was he really? What kind of scientist gets a personalized apology from the president and the CIA director? I mean, we respect scientists, sure, but this much? And it's not like every CIA employee who dies gets a VIP invite to the Oval Office. I mean, this screams something way bigger. So the kids started digging, and what they found painted a chilling picture. Turns out Frank Olsen wasn't just any scientist, he was one of the top minds assigned to the super secret biological warfare lab at Fort Detrick, Maryland, during World War II. This was the same lab that Sidney Gottlieb's mentor had founded and run, so yeah, maybe that's how Frank got his foot in the door with the CIA. But it doesn't stop there. After the war, Frank became the lead scientist on Operation Harness, which was a 3-month biological warfare trial in the Caribbean. And what were they doing down there? Oh, just exposing animals to anthrax, tularemia, and brucellosis. Just light stuff. But it's not all. Frank was also involved in Operation Sea Spray, which, if you've been following along, you'll recognize from what I mentioned earlier. And if you really want to go down the rabbit hole, he spent a significant amount of time at Plum Island. Yep, Plum Island. Plum Island was where they were modifying insects, essentially turning nature's little critters into biological weapons. So, what was Frank's speciality there? He wasn't just developing the pathogens, he was figuring out how to deliver them. He designed devices like canisters disguised as shaving cream bottles that could disperse anthrax into the air at will. And, well, I mean, remember that scene in the original Jurassic Park where the guy hides dinosaur embryos in a shaving cream can? Yeah. Starting to wonder if that was a subtle nod to CIA. Hmm? But Frank didn't stop at shaving cream. This guy he's got a rap sheet, I tell you. He worked on things like lighters that release poisonous gas, and even lipstick that could kill someone with a single application. It's real life spy stuff. Like, this wasn't just fiction. This was real life. He was developing this stuff. He was making it. So you have to ask yourself, if Frank Olson was knee deep in some of the most secret, unethical experiments the CIA was running, and then suddenly gets dosed with LSD without his knowledge, starts freaking out, and ends up dead under mysterious circumstances, do you really now believe it was just suicide? Or was this a cleanup job to protect some of the darkest secrets the US government has ever tried to hide? And I know we're talking a lot about Frank Olsen, but this guy is literally the reason why we have so much information about MK Ultra now. So he needs to get his fucking credit. I mean, come on. And after Frank Olsen's death, the situation surrounding his involvement with the CIA continued to unravel, revealing an even darker side to the agency's operations. It gets worse. So, in the same year he died, Frank actually stepped down from his position as the chief of the CIA's Special Operations Division. Officially, he cited the stress of the job, but there were other deeper reasons at play. By this point, Frank had seen enough. He had witnessed the brutality of MK Ultra, and it was clear that the people he was working with, particularly Sidney Gottlieb and Robert Ashbrook, had no concern for ethical boundaries. They saw people as expendables, human beings to be used and discarded in the pursuit of control and manipulation. Frank couldn't ignore the inhumanity any longer, but by then it was too late. Frank knew too much. He's just he was a walking liability for the CIA. Come on. He'd become entangled in a web of secrets and illegal operations, operations that violated almost every fucking international law. The Geneva Conventions of 1929 explicitly bans such practices, but in classic CIA nature, they didn't give a fuck. And who else didn't care? The Nazis. Well, with Operation Paperclip, the United States had brought over Nazi scientists who had been responsible for horrific experimentations in concentration camps. These scientists were now embedded within the CIA, helping to continue their work, except this time, the subjects of the experiments weren't prisoners or unfortunate victims of war. No, now they're just targeting American citizens, men and women who have been lured into the CIA's traps without their knowledge. So it wasn't just Sidney Gottlieb who had this dark agenda and was calling all the shots. Nazi doctors, now working for the CIA, would lecture CIA agents on their finer details of human suffering, from serum dosages to the rate at which people died from certain poisons. And these lessons were being passed down in secret lectures. So they were learning the exact same techniques that have been used to dehumanize and torture people during World War II. Meanwhile, the CIA's experiments didn't just stay in one place. Oh no. In 1955, they set up Red Rooms in San Francisco, rooms designed to test mind control using a combination of LSD and sex. Prostitutes were paid to lure men into these rooms where they would be dosed with LSD, and an agent would watch their reactions from behind a two-way mirror. Wild. These rooms weren't just about, drug experimentation. They were about using sex as a tool for mind control. And I mean, we've all been controlled by sex at one point. I mean, but the CIA was trying to see if intimate encounters, when paired with mind altering substances, could be used to extract confessions, intelligence, or secrets. So, yeah, essentially, they were just trying to see how sex and drugs can manipulate someone's behaviors and emotions. And if you put them together, both sex and drugs, is there a way that you can take vulnerable people and make them more willing to share secrets under this influence and in a post nut state? I mean, there's no other way to put it, but so it's all about exploiting the mind when it's at its most vulnerable. This is the real nitty gritty of MK Ultra. How do we make people so vulnerable that we can now use them, control them, and just make them reveal everything about themselves? And as we mentioned before, this wasn't just done on random civilians, right? They also tested on prisoners. One of the most notorious cases of this was that of James Whitey Bulger, a notorious organized crime boss who was incarcerated in the Atlanta penitentiary. In 1957, after Frank Olson's death, the CIA's experiments continued, now targeting prisoners for testing. Bulger, along with other inmates, was volunteered for the experiment. He was injected with LSD and subjected to the same hallucinogenic torture that had become part of MKUltra's signature. Bulger later described the effects in chilling detail. He said, and I'm just going to list them, right? This is what he said. He was filled with panic and paranoia. He had a loss of appetite. Hallucinations made the room look like it was changing shape. There was blood coming out of the walls. People were turning into skeletons in front of him, and even seeing a camera morph into the head of a frog. Classic trip. But this wasn't just an isolated thing to Bulger. Bulger was just one of many inmates who suffered the brunt of these experiments. And also, the CIA didn't just limit their experiments to the US, they also took their experiments across the border into Canada, where they continued their mind altering tests on unsuspecting participants. So now you've got like kind of international warfare going on. And this was all to create and manipulate individuals and in turn whole populations, if it was successful, to create agents for the US, right? So controlling them, people who would obey without question, carry out operations without even knowing their true purpose, and maybe even not even remembering what they've done. And I just think that what happened to Frank Olson and these sins of the CIA, it's never really been fully acknowledged as the years go by. The story remains completely shrouded in mystery, lies, secrets that may never ever see the light of day. And the CIA's disinformation campaign around MK Ultra continued to play out even after the project had supposedly been shut down. The agency's efforts to cover up the truth were extensive. They didn't just end with the destruction of documents when Sidney Gottlieb left the agency in 1973, which, yeah, he did that, destroyed documents. But in fact, in 1963, the CIA's Inspector General had caught wind of MK Ultra's activities, deeming them immoral and shutting the project down. But despite being disbanded officially, the project didn't disappear completely. The CIA continued to push the idea that MK Ultra was finished, but there were whispers from former agents suggesting otherwise. One former agent, who was very familiar with the CIA's modus operandi, stated that MK Ultra had just been rebranded, possibly under a different name. Probably went back to Project Bluebird or Project Artichoke. But he says it definitely continued in some form, operating under the radar. And we do have to consider that the CIA does have a huge history of disinformation campaigns. In fact, the CIA's practice of creating false narratives was something the agency took pride in, to be honest, especially when it came to covering up embarrassing or criminal activities. It wouldn't have been out of character for them to declare MK Ultra dead while secretly continuing similar operations. In fact, there's even the question of whether Sidney Gottlieb himself continued these practices after leaving the CIA. If the CIA was funding universities to carry out these experiments, it's possible that they continued to fund Gottlieb in some form using black funds or covert channels. And the destruction of so many records combined with the CIA's repeated denials has made it very difficult to get a full understanding of MK Ultra's true scope. The congressional hearings in 1975 aimed at uncovering the truth about the project ended in complete frustration, with former agents denying knowledge and some agents claiming that they've got amnesia and they don't remember. And they just simply didn't have any documents to provide. And when they did speak, their memory seemed mysteriously fuzzy, and all of the hearings were ultimately blocked at nearly every turn. The American public was left with more questions than answers, and it was just a complete farce. They didn't reveal anything, they couldn't get to the bottom of it, and it's still shrouded in so much mystery. And then you fast forward to today, and the theory that MK Ultra still exists is alive and well in modern discussion about mind control, of course. When you think about shows like Stranger Things, what do you think Stranger Things is about? I'll give you a second just to think about it. What is Stranger Things about? It's about a town that gets exposed to something that shows them the upside down, hallucinogenics. They are seeing monsters. They're seeing the sky turn in a different way. And it's all happening in one town. So we could look at that and just say, like, isn't that's not just some wild sci-fi story? So could that actually be based on MK Ultra? No, the whole mind control thing, not as fictional as you'd think. Do you ever wonder where it got its creepy lab experiments and mind control plotlines? It's all inspired by MK Ultra. The show's Hawkins National Laboratory. That's basically a fictional version of the secret government facilities where MK Ultra experiments happened. And 11, her powers, the experiments on her, the sensory deprivation tank. That's all drawn from real stuff. And it doesn't just stop there with the link with Stranger Things. If you didn't know this, the show was actually originally going to be called Montauk. And that's based on the Montauk Project. And that is the supposed continuation of MK Ultra that involved even crazier experiments like time travel and contact with aliens. The Duffer Brothers blended all of that into the Upside Down, giving us monsters, supernatural powers, but the roots, it's grounded in actual government conspiracies. So while you're watching 11 flip vans with their minds, just remember the real story behind it is even more messed up. Stranger Things, in my opinion, isn't just a sci fi show, it's a peek into the dark side of history, and it is linked, directly linked, with MK Ultra. All right, let's take a little detour from the usual CIA corridors and shady safe houses and head over to Pont Saint Esprit, a sleepy little town in southern France. You've probably never heard of it unless you've done some deep dives into weird history, like myself, but trust me, this story is wild. So, back in 1951, this peaceful riverside town suddenly became the epicenter of one of the strangest mass poisonings in modern history. But here's the twist. Some people believe MK Ultra had its fingerprints all over it. Yes, they went to France. So, what exactly happened? So, one day in August, the town just went insane. I'm not exaggerating. People started hallucinating like they were trapped in the wildest acid trip imaginable. Villagers were seeing terrifying visions, snakes, fire, demons, you name it. There are reports of people jumping out of windows to escape imaginary fires, screaming in terror, and running through the streets convinced they were being chased by monsters. One man even thought that he was a dragon and leapt off a building trying to fly. Spoiler alert, he didn't. Initially, the authorities chalked it up to ergo poisoning. That's an hallucinogenic mold that can grow on rye and other grains. So ergo or ergot, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but it's a natural precursor to LSD. It made sense on paper. People ate contaminated bread from the local bakery, and boom, mass hysteria. But here's where it gets a bit tricky on that. The ergot theory doesn't fully hold up. Later investigations showed that the bread supply chain didn't align with widespread contamination. Plus, ergot poisoning usually affects specific parts of the body first, like causing convulsions or gangrene before hallucinations kick in. But in Pont Saint Esprit, people went straight to seeing demons and losing their minds. Now, here's where MK Ultra connection slides in. So, some researchers and conspiracy theorists believe that the CIA was behind the whole thing. And when you think about what they did in San Francisco, what they've done to Frank, and what they've done to so many people, I mean, it's not a far reach to think that they might be involved in this. So, but why would the CIA poison a French town? Well, they wanted to test if this worked outside of US. They wanted to see if other nationalities, other countries could also be controlled with this drug. So they thought, why not just go to a small, isolated town where no one would really suspect a thing and wouldn't really make the headlines? Like, you've probably never heard of this town. So, whatever they did, it worked. Um, Plus, if something went wrong, they could just blame it on bad bread and walk away. I mean, so the reason why it's kind of linked to the CIA is because they did want to do this on a mass scale. They wanted to try this on the mass scale. And there's even a theory that US Army's Special Operation Division at Fort Detrick, Maryland, the same guys involved in the other MK Ultra experiments, were responsible for dosing in Pont Saint Esprit as a field test. Of course, the CIA never confirmed any involvement, and the official story still points to ergot, but come on. It's very hard to ignore the timing. 1951 was right around the time MK Ultra was ramping up the experiments, plus the idea of using an unsuspecting town as a petri dish for mind control is the exact thing that MK Ultra would do. So I just thought that was just an interesting diversion. That around the same time, this was also happening over in France. Um, so what do you think? Was Point Saint Esprit just an unlucky victim of moldy bread, or was it the site of one of the earliest mass LSD experiments? I'll let you decide. But either way, it's a chilling reminder that when it comes to the government experiments, nothing is off the table, not even an entire town. And hey, if you ever find yourself in Point Saint Esprit, maybe skip the local bakery. Now let's move on to some other theories surrounding MK Ultra. So the first one is that Charles Manson was part of MK Ultra and is one of the most persistent and chilling conspiracies surrounding this project. So here's how it unfolds. Manson actually spent time in prison during the 1950s and 60s, where he reportedly underwent the psychiatric evaluations and group therapy sessions so that some believe were the cover up for those MK Ultra experiments. After his release in 1967, Manson moved to San Francisco's Haight Ashbury. All comes back to San Francisco, guys. So, this is a neighborhood infamous for its psychedelic culture and coincidentally was the home of Dr. Louis Jolyon West, who was a psychiatrist with ties to MK Ultra. West was known for conducting LSD experiments on unwitting subjects, and theorists argue that Manson could have been one of them. Manson's access to large quantities of LSD and his uncanny ability to manipulate his followers into committing brutal murders adds fuel to this theory. The idea is that Manson learned mind control techniques through his exposure to MK Ultra, and he used them to create this infamous Manson family cult, which I'm definitely going to be doing another episode on in the future. So stay tuned for that. But his followers were often dosed with psychedelics, and under his influence, they carried out the gruesome Tate LaBianca murders in 1969. Some conspiracy theorists even argue that Manson's crimes were orchestrated by the CIA to discredit the counterculture movement of the 1960s. By associating hippies, LSD, and the peace movement with violence and chaos, the government could regain control over a rebellious generation. Makes sense. Next, we got the Unabomber was a victim of MK Ultra. Ted Kaczynski, better known as the Unabomber, terrorized the US for nearly 2 decades with a series of bombings that targeted universities, airlines, and tech companies. But before his descent into domestic terrorism, Kaczynski was a mathematical prodigy who entered the Harvard University at the age of 16. It's here that the MK Ultra connection comes in. So at Harvard, Kaczynski participated in a psychological study led by Dr. Henry Murray, a psychologist also with known ties to the CIA backed research. This wasn't just your typical experiment, it involved extensive psychological abuse. Participants were subjected to intense interrogation techniques where their personal beliefs and values were attacked, ridiculed, and dismantled over many months. Many believe that these sessions were MK Ultra mind control experiments in disguise designed to break down individual psyches. Kaczynski later described feeling betrayed and humiliated by these experiments, and some theorists argued that this experience triggered his paranoia and eventual anti-technology manifesto. The idea is that Kaczynski's transformation from brilliant student to reclusive terrorist wasn't just a personal descent, it was a result of psychological conditioning inflicted by the MK Ultra operatives. His manifesto, which decreed modern technology and industrial society, is seen by some as a reaction to the dehumanization he experienced during those experiments. Next up, we got the CIA tried to create Manchurian candidates. So, one of the most famous conspiracies about MK Ultra is that the CIA was trying to create Manchurian candidates, individuals who could be programmed to assassinate political figures without their knowledge. This theory is inspired by the 1959 novel The Manchurian Candidate, later adapted into films, which tells the story of a soldier who's brainwashed into becoming an unwitting assassin. And as we've covered, under this MK Ultra, the CIA explored whether techniques like hypnosis, LSD, and sensory deprivation could be used to create these mind-controlled assassins. They wanted to see if they could implant false memories, erase real ones, and trigger violent actions through post-hypnotic suggestions. While there's no official record of success, many believe that the program didn't stop, it just went deeper underground. This theory actually links MK Ultra to high-profile assassinations, suggesting that Lee Harvey Oswald, JFK's assassin, Sirhan Sirhan, RFK's assassin, or even James Earl Ray, Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassin, and that they were all Manchurian candidates. Sirhan Sirhan, for example, claimed to have no memory of shooting Robert Kennedy, leading some to believe he was under hypnotic control. The CIA's destruction of MK Ultra documents in the 1970s only adds to the suspicion that they were trying to cover up these experiments. I can't believe they can just destroy documents. It's crazy, and everyone's okay with it. Okay, whatever. And then you've got celebrities. Celebrities are MK Ultra slaves, right? So the idea that celebrities are being controlled through MK Ultra techniques is one of the most popular modern conspiracies, known as monarch programming. This theory claims that famous figures in music, film, and fashion industries are subjected to mind control experiments to influence the masses and push hidden agendas. Britney Spears is often cited as a victim of MK Ultra. I think Britney Spears is a victim of many things. If you've seen recently any of her Instagram videos, I don't know if she's on TikTok, but I definitely saw them on Instagram. Have you seen that with the? She's got like the knives and she's dancing with the knives. Like, it's it's terrifying. Honestly, it's terrifying. But it's also very entertaining at the same time. But she's just like dancing with these knives and like looking, staring into the camera and stuff. It's like it's a horror film, honestly. If you haven't seen it, just go to her page because it's worth your time. Trust me. But also they link it to her, her infamous 2007 breakdown where she shaved her head off and just was completely erratic. Some believe this to have been a programming breakdown, a common theme actually in monarch mind control theories. Kanye West, known for his unpredictable outbursts, has also been linked to this theory where claims that his hospitalization in 2016 was actually a reprogramming session. The theory suggests that music videos, award show performances, and even fashion choices are filled with MK Ultra symbolism. The butterfly is often seen as a sign of monarch programming, while fractured mirrors, doll imagery, and checkerboard patterns are believed to symbolize mind fragmentation. Artists like Doja Cat, Lady Gaga, and Beyonce have all been accused of using this imagery, leading some to believe they're part of a larger mind control agenda. These celebrities, according to the theory, are puppets used to manipulate culture and control public thought. Their meltdowns or public breakdowns are seen as signs that their programming is failing, while their comebacks are framed as evidence that they've been reprogrammed. And you see it all the time. Artists come back and they're kind of like, who is this person? Like, where did you come from? You are not the same artist that we saw before. We see it all the time. So it could be that these are all part of an MK Ultra. So whether you buy into them or not, MK Ultra's legacy continues to spark fascination and fear in equal measure. What I think is quite clear is that the CIA's experiments didn't stop with the end of MK Ultra. So whether that's that they continued under new names, different methodologies, or even different organizations, the ideas that began with MK Ultra have likely evolved now, influencing a range of sectors like entertainment, politics, violent incidents. So let me know what you think. Do you think that research into mind control and psychological manipulation could still be ongoing? And if so, how far does that really go? I would love to hear your thoughts, guys. So let me know in the comments or on our socials at Conspirashy. You can find us on Instagram and TikTok. That's just at Conspirashy. You can also email me, conspirashy@gmail.com. I'm always keen to hear what you guys have to say. And who knows, your message could inspire a future episode.
Conspiracy. Conspiracy.
That's it for today's episode of Conspirashy, where weird is the new normal. Join us next Wednesday for a brand new conspiracy theory. And if you like today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your conspiracy-loving mates. And remember, the truth is out there.